Next up, we've got Michael Georgeff. He's a computer scientist and entrepreneur. Has studied mathematics and physics and even aeronautics at universities around Australia, and has also started an organisation called AAII, or A Squared I Squared, in Australia in 1988. I'll leave it free. Thank you for coming along. We're privileged to hear you talk. This is Michael Georgeff.
So we have to do a few changes to the computers here. So thank you very much for having me. See if I can cope with the technology. 9:37. So the advantage of following on from the previous speaker, it's a pity Rob's not here, but I'll say this to him afterwards, is that I have a chance to comment on the previous talk rather than put my hand up and wait to be selected. And in some sense it has nothing to do with my talk, but it's fun. I think there's a fundamental issue with this notion of best or better. Various people pointed out how contextual it was, but given that we're talking about the singularity, which is fundamentally about a very long-term view of what's going to happen. The problem with best is it's not only contextual, it's extremely short-term, and it's also extremely ill-informed. So if we went back to the beginnings of time and that bog or swamp where all of life began, the bug from which all of life, or most of life as we know it on the Earth, has derived from, was an incredibly unpopular bug on the edge of the swamp, and would certainly never have been chosen as the best bug that was round. Yet that's the bug that ended up being the one that's survived the longest. So I think fundamentally the whole issue with the notion of trying to choose best is we have no idea what best is, and there's no way that we're going to be able to choose it right. And as part of the idea of the singularity is this notion that we get to certain points where predicting the way the world's going to go is impossible for us to do. Okay, now I'll talk about what I was going to talk about. I want to talk probably more about the past and the future, but my aim is to try and give you some understanding of some of the ideas around trying to build rational machines, and then I'll come back at the end just to say what I think about how this impacts thoughts on the singularity, which I must say I'm agnostic about, but we could get to a position of positive feedback, but maybe we won't. So one of the things I've been interested in most of my life after the aeronautics bit was about how to build intelligent machines. And I guess there are roughly two approaches to doing it. One is that we could try and wire something up in some way, maybe make sure it's wired in a way that it can learn, and not really understand how it works, but put it all together and throw it in the world and have it sort of acquire the knowledge, and then so at the end of the day we end up with an intelligent device, but we in a sense don't program it. We let it learn and develop itself, or if you like, we sort of build another brain, but don't really understand anything about the way it comes to make its decisions and get on in the world. The alternative is to do some, if you like, genetic design and program a computer, if you like, or build a computer that thinks like us, and by that I mean is rational in some sense. What do we mean by that? We all have some idea that there's some notion about how we get round in the world and are successful. And generally speaking, apart from luck and a whole lot of other things, There's a view that the more rational you are, the more likely you are to be successful. And rationality has a lot of concepts about it, but fundamental to it is, you're really rational if you form objectives and then you do a whole lot of actions in order to achieve those objectives. So my interest was not in trying to build a brain, but how do we build a mind or into a machine that is rational in that sense, that somehow can get around in a very complex world and survive. And the method about it is to sort of pre-program it to think in some ways like ourselves. But I just wanted to contrast that that's not the only path to trying to build intelligent machines. So I want to go right back into the past and let you know where all this began. I'm going to show you bits of a movie. I'm just going to select some, so I'm going to wind through it if I can remember the timings for it. And what like all these movies in the past, they're incredibly slow and compared to movies today, so you just have to bear with me on that. So just while this is starting, this is a Shakey was a robot that was produced at Stanford, where I spent a lot of my time. This was a bit before I arrived, and it was really the first time that we'd tried to build a machine that had this notion of a goal, that had the notion of an objective to achieve. And what do I mean by that? I'll just turn it right down so you don't have to listen to the... forgotten the name of the song. Yes, that's right. Yeah. This movie was made in around 1972. This was the first time that people tried to move away from programming writing programs which were a sequence of tasks, and instead trying to give a robot, if you like, a goal or objective to achieve, and let it piece together those elements and work things out for itself.
Ranging from space exploration to industrial automation. Shakey operates in this experimental environment of rooms, doorways, and simple objects. The top lens belongs to Shakey's television camera. He uses it to obtain visual information about his own location or about other objects. These walls were made high enough so that Shakey cannot see over them with his television camera. Shakey uses these feelers, or cat whiskers, to tell him if he has bumped into anything. He can push objects with this push bar. The programs controlling Shakey reside in a large PDP-10 computer and occupy over 300,000 36-bit words of storage. Shakey communicates with the computer over a radio link. We use a teletype to give instructions to the computer programs that control Shakey. Shakey reports back to us using the teletype and the cathode ray tube display. An executive program handles...
Okay, I'll stop it there and I'll wind through it a bit more. But I mean, it's interesting how far technology's come in relatively few years. It's again, I mean, it sort of goes to whether the whole Moore's law issue. Okay, so this is the part where Shakey is reasoning about how to get round in the world. The reason to show it to you is so you get some understanding of how this notion of having goals that you try to achieve first appeared in terms of trying to build machines that were, if you like, rational. What's happening to the sound there?
if various actions were taken. First, Strips finds those actions that are most relevant to the task. The preconditions of these relevant actions are set up as sub-goals. These sub-goals, in turn, lead to others. Finally, all of the needed actions are assembled into a plan to accomplish the goal. This chart shows the major components of the complete robot system. Now we'll watch Shakey solve some problems. In our first task for Shakey, we want him to use this box to block this door, starting from this position. The robot executive is capable of understanding a wide variety of English statements, questions, and commands. We can type Shakey's first task in English, which is translated into predicate calculus, the language used by Strips. Strips analyzes the task and produces a plan to solve it. Let's diagram the plan found by Strips. First, Shakey plans to use the action go to D5 that will take him to the doorway. Then he will use the actions go through D5 and go to D3. Finally, he plans to use go through D3 and block D4 with box 1. After computing the plan, Shakey begins to execute it. He moves to the first doorway by using the action go to D5.
Just while this is going, I don't know whether, it's probably not clear, but this was incredibly hard to get a robot to do these sort of things. Just the idea of getting through a doorway. It took years and years of research trying to get that to happen. So what seems relatively obvious and painfully slow is actually
the contents of the next room. His view of the floor along his path shows no obstructions, so he moves into the next room by using the action go through D5. But just after this move, Charlie the Gremlin blocks the next doorway with a box. Shakey doesn't know it yet, but the box is right in his planned path. Because the contents of this room are unknown, he checks the next leg of his journey with the television camera. The box is in Shakey's field of view. This is how it appears on the TV monitor. Shakey's vision programs analyze the picture and tell him that his path to the doorway is obstructed. He takes another TV picture of the obstructing object. Here we monitor on the cathode ray tube display the results of vision programs that enhance edges, identify the main regions of the scene, and determine the location of the box on the floor. Once located, the object that blocks his path can be entered in Shakey's model and given a name, box 2. Now Shakey realizes that he cannot carry out the original version of his plan. His first recourse is to see if some other version of the old plan might work. Shakey remembers the form of a plan and can substitute other symbols into the same form to produce another version of the plan. In this case, Shakey was fortunate. The new version will solve his problem. Otherwise, he would have had to use Strips to make a brand new plan, possibly one that used the unblock action to clear the doorway. Here, though, Strips was not needed, so Shakey...
Okay, so you get the idea, and I'll finish it there. So this was, as I said, the first time that we introduced these notions of goals and the idea of pulling together various bits and pieces of various actions to put together a complete plan, if you like, to achieve an objective. And so it was sort of a radical departure from typical programming at the time. Okay, well then sort of I came along, and I'll go back to, I'll start this. So this is the beginning of, this was some of the work that I began. Actually, it's from a PowerPoint that is an old PowerPoint that was before as you'll see, before clip art. But I was trying to investigate. I mean, the problem with the Shakey model was it was still very constrained, and it was still basically it was still trying to it was still thinking of generating a plan of action that you then followed. So while it started out without a program, it didn't require a programmer to write the program, if you think of the plan as a program. At the end of the day, what it did was use its reasoning mechanism, generate a sequence of steps the robot had to take, and then start walking along those steps trying to take them. And if it failed, well, then it would think again. But it was too constrained to handle more complex problems. So this came by watching my cat one day getting around in the room trying to get to some food on the table and watching what it did. And essentially what you see is a much more flexible way of getting around in the world. As I said, this was before clip art, so I wasn't very good at putting together a cat. So the cat wants to get to the food. In a sense, it forms a plan of action, but a very high level one, just in terms of jumping on the chair, jumping up on the table, and then getting to the food. And in the normal course of events, that's what the cat did. But because it was actually my food on the table, so I tried to prevent the cat from doing so, and I moved the chair away to stop the cat jumping up on the table. But then the cat just found another way. It jumped up onto a ledge that I hadn't noticed and then jumped onto the table. So the cat very quickly just changed its path. I mean, it didn't, and found another way to the table. And although the cat didn't do this, it would have if circumstance had been different. For example, if in following that path it had discovered on the shelf a bowl of food, it would have stopped at that point in time and eaten the food there. So what we were trying to look at is what's going on in the cat's head, or what do we imagine is going on in the cat's head, that enables it to act in these ways. And let me give you another example that's probably more realistic in terms of what humans do. If I'm trying to drive, let's say I want to attend a meeting in Brisbane, and I decide to fly up to Brisbane. I decide to drive to the airport. I've got a lot of options. Decide to drive to the airport, catch my flight to Brisbane and attend the meeting. There are a lot of things that go on, but I certainly don't pre-program the whole thing. So I've got this notion. What I do instead is I form a whole lot of what you call intermediate objectives, and those objectives are very, very general, but they put certain constraints on my options. So once I've decided what we come to call intentions, my intention is to go to Brisbane, and my intention is to go by flying and driving. I form that intention, and then I set off in my car. If everything goes right, that's fine. I fill out, if you like, those intentions with more details as I observe the world and get more information about, which lane to change to in the car and where to park, etc. So as I acquire more beliefs about the world, I can start filling out that intention with more and more detail. But also, if things go wrong, because I'm goal-directed and because this intention is not locked down as a program, I've always got the option to reconsider things, but reconsider them in a very constrained way. I reconsider them within that sort of framework of that intention that I've already formed. So let me give you an example. If I'm driving along and my car breaks down on the freeway, at that point in time, the usual thing I'll do is consider other options for getting to the airport so that I can still catch the plane in order to get up to get to my meeting. So, because it's not pre-programmed, just somewhat like Shakey, I can grab a whole lot of other bits and pieces and, for example, decide I'm going to call a taxi. That will involve a plan to use my mobile to call a taxi, catch the taxi, get to the airport. It may be that there's no taxi available, and so I might consider other ways of getting to the airport. At a certain point in time, I may decide that I can't get to the airport at all, and I'll think of other ways to attend the meeting. For example, maybe I can do a teleconference to the meeting and so forth, so maybe I just, stay on the freeway, use my mobile, teleconference into the meeting and don't go to Brisbane at all. But it's a very complex set of considerations that the human is going through, but there are fundamental elements of that. One is you're using your beliefs about the world to determine what to do. You're forming these, what we call, and you've got certain objectives or goals or desires you're trying to achieve, and then you're forming certain intentions, and those intentions very much constrain what you do. In other words, you don't reconsider everything at every moment in time. These intentions to get to the airport, to go to the meeting, really constrain your options, and as I'll show you, that becomes very important. So these sort of considerations led us to try and say, look, what are the fundamental elements of rationality? Because they could be everything, So the question was, what are the fundamental elements? And so we decided we would try and use these three elements, beliefs, desires, intentions, as the key elements for rationality. And it became known as DDI agents, which then spawned a whole area of research. And so these were what the aim was: could we build machines that we could ascribe beliefs, desires, intentions, and the Shakey-like plans too. And so we built machines like this, and we gave them certain rules for how they go about achieving their goals, and how they, when things change, how they change their minds and so forth. But then we discovered that there were different types of agent, and let me just give you an example. In the Shakey world, it was, if things went wrong, the agent would replan. Our issue, and what issue was, under what circumstances would agents replan or reconsider what they were doing? And depending on how we set various parameters in the program, we got different sorts of behaviour. So, for example, the key issue for us is, when do you give up on a certain intention and change your mind and do something else? And so let me give you, from a decision theoretic point of view, whenever the world changes in any way whatsoever, you are, what you should do from a theoretical point of view is reconsider all your options and potentially change your mind and do, re-evaluate the best possible outcome and then do that. Humans don't do that, right? When circumstances change here, like we start late, the lights go off, sunny outside, we never reconsider all our options. For example, we don't some of us may reconsider whether we stay here and continue listening to my talk. But we don't usually reconsider whether we should stay married or get married. We don't reconsider whether we should change our jobs. In other words, there are certain things that we've locked down. When you're building a machine and things go wrong, you're trying to get to the airport, when things go wrong, the question is, well, what do I reconsider? Do I reconsider everything, just this part? So the real question we had is, if you like, how strongly do you stick to your intentions? So there's some agents we built, depending on how we parameterised those agents, as sticking to their commitments very strongly, versus being somewhat weaker in sticking to their commitments. And because beliefs, desires and intentions all interact, you would get an extreme where the most rational agent would behave in what we think is a rational way. You'd have agents at the other extreme that were so committed to their intentions that no matter what beliefs came in, they would reject the evidence. In other words, we had agents that where the evidence was saying you're not going to achieve your objectives. You know, there are all these factors that are suggesting you're not going to achieve your objectives, you should change your mind. But the agent was so committed, if you like, to its intentions that it was blind to any of those beliefs. And indeed, you get, obviously, as we know, you get humans like that are so committed to their actions that they are blind to the circumstances around them and they, if you like, reject compelling evidence that they should change their mind. On the other hand, we had agents that would change their mind all the time. In other words, the smallest bit of evidence would come in and they'd say, maybe I'm not going to achieve my objective, let's rethink and do things all again. So we had this big spectrum between agents that were strongly committed, weakly committed, and we didn't know, what should we choose? Which agents, if you like, were more likely to survive in the real world? So we did a number of experiments to try and understand this, and so we developed this little world of tiles where a robot runs around in this space and can pick up, if you like, pots of gold, and the aim of the robot was to collect as many points as it could. But what happened is we made it dynamic. In other words, this 40 might change in value and it might suddenly appear over here. And so there was some value in the robot running around as fast as it could to collect everything. And this really is the speed at which we changed that, made the world for the robot change. And this was the robot's effectiveness. So clearly, as we made things change, your effectiveness is going to go down because everything keeps disappearing just as you get there. And the idea was that should the robot took time planning to get things. So its question was, once I've planned to go, let's say I'm a robot sitting here, I form a plan to get here and pick up this pot of gold. If that pot of gold disappears or looks likely to disappear, should I replan or should I just stick to my commitment and keep going? In other words, going back to what I was saying before, how flexible should I be in replanning? Should I do it often or not? And is it better, depending on the speed of the world, what's it better to do? So, the so-called cautious guy is the guy that replans all the time, and the green guy is the guy that sticks to his intentions. Even if the 40 disappears, that guy is going to continue on and go to that spot, even though he or it knows that there's no 40 there. So cautious agent, lots of planning. Bold agent just does what it wants, does what it originally committed to. So it was sort of somewhat surprising, although I guess we didn't really think it through. When it was a very slow world, we thought the agent that would do better was the one that spent a lot of time replanning, because it's no use trundling off to the spot where there's no gold, and so you might as well spend the time planning and get it right. But as it turned out, the guy that just stuck to his guns was the more successful one, and the reason being that while the cautious agent spent its time replanning, the other agent was round collecting pots of gold. So, in other words, it was better to get out and do something than just, to sit round and keep thinking about it. As the world got faster and faster, it turned out that the bold guy turned out to be significantly less than the cautious guy. In other words, things were changing so much that the bold guy was just going while he was acting, his acts weren't achieving anything. So it was actually better to spend some time planning. And although these differences look quite small, in terms of survival, they're dramatic. If we're talking in terms of competitive advantage, you really want to be on top in terms of efficiency and effectiveness, because otherwise you're not going to survive. Anyway, there is some compromise which we call a rational agent, which gets that balance right. And basically a rational agent, instead of being at one extreme or the other, was in the middle. And I won't go into the details of how you determine how you design that agent to be in the middle there. But essentially it's around the notion of you respond to events appropriately. In other words, it turns out to be sunny outside, maybe you reconsider whether you stay in this lecture or not, but you're not going to reconsider whether you're married or not. So it's a matter of responding to appropriate events or not. So why am I spending so much time saying this is that things are simple. While we've decided on a relatively simple architecture of beliefs, desires, intentions and how they work, in terms of trying to build machines that survive, even at the smallest point of deciding, does it pay attention to belief, does it stick to its goals or not, there's a ton of stuff we don't understand. And it's very hard to sort of pull out, even in this incredibly simple robot world, what is the most efficient way of getting round and therefore enable us to build something that's going to survive in the real world. Okay, and so that then we worked with a lot of various philosophers and whatever at Stanford and trying to come up with a whole lot of rules about what practical reasoning or rationality involved. So, and I won't go through them all, but just to give you an idea, you know, if you actually intend to do an action and also believe that you will not under any circumstance do it, we decided that if we built a computer, or if a computer did that, then it wouldn't be a rational one. On the other hand, we would say that, well, you could intend to do an action, but you could also believe that you may not, you needn't believe that you will do it. In other words, you could intend to do something, but you then, on the alternative, but you could say, well, but circumstances could happen, I won't actually get round to doing it because of other priorities or whatever. That would be fine, that would be rational. It wouldn't be what a normal computer would do. It's not sort of programmatically rational, but if we're trying to build these survivable machines, it was rational. So we developed a whole lot of rules about what rationality was, and we embedded those in our computers. So to give you an example of some of the things we did, and I'll just check the time. How are we going for time? I can't remember when I started.
Started at about 10 minutes.
Okay. So I'll go for about another 5 or 10 minutes. 10 minutes? I'll continue on, just shut me up. Okay, so this was the work we did on the space shuttle, and the problem here was that the astronauts were spending about 80% of their time fixing malfunctions on the space shuttle and not able to do any of the scientific experiments. They were too hard to program because there were too many things that went wrong. So what we did, both in the States and then when I came back to Australia, was use these intelligent BDI agents to interact with the shuttle via Johnson Space Centre to monitor and respond to these, to what was going wrong and to do this diagnosis. So these agents worked with BDI agents, they worked in this goal-directed way. And why they worked was that they had, because they were so flexible and could cope with all these different circumstances, it was possible to design them to handle all the various problems on the shuttle, which hadn't been possible with programs. So we ran it against Discovery for a long time, but it was eventually we were inhibited by the fact that the computers on the shuttle are so minuscule, we couldn't really get the intelligent agent onto the shuttle, and so it would always run at mission control. So this is you don't have to understand anything about it except to say this is one of the main control systems of the shuttle, which fires all these various jets by mixing fuel and oxidizer. the astronauts control it by various switches and talkbacks and so forth. And so, and I won't go through the details, but the astronaut takes up 1,000-page manuals that tell them what to do, and that they're really, I don't know how they manage to work them, because there are little points here. It'll say interconnect the orbital manoeuvring system with the reaction control system prior to deorbit, turn it back where it was again. Now, deorbit could happen 10 days later, and somehow the astronaut has to remember that they have to turn all these switches back again. So what typically would happen in the space shuttle, there'd be bits of Velcro and stickers all over the place telling them to turn the switches back when they were deorbiting and so forth. So it's these sort of rules that our intelligent agents were, in fact, we were trying to build an agent that was smart enough to carry out the procedures in the manual. So I won't show you how that worked, but you can get the idea. There were multiple agents. They all had their own goals. They'd look for problems, get over them in various ways, basically using that BDI philosophy that I talked about before. Just to go back to the one bit I didn't show you in the movie, at the end of the movie, there's a allusion to HAL, which in 2001, which was the movie that came out exactly the same time they were building Shakey. But I'll just remind you of HAL. Most of you have probably seen it if you're at this conference, but in case you haven't, which way? I'll just remind you of this.
Open the 5 bay doors, please, Hal. Open the 5 bay doors, please, Hal. Hello, Hal, do you read me? Hello, Hal, do you read me? Do you read me, Hal? Do you read me, Hal? Hello, Hal, do you read me? Hello, Hal, do you read me? Do you read me, Hal?
Affirmative, Dave. I read you.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
What's the problem?
I think you know what the problem is just as well as I do.
What are you talking about, Hal?
This mission is too important for me to allow you to jeopardize it.
I don't know what you're talking about, Hal.
I know that you and Frank were planning to disconnect me, and I'm afraid that's something I cannot allow to happen.
Where the hell did you get that idea, Hal?
Dave, although you took very thorough precautions in the pod against my hearing you, I could see your lips move.
All right, Hal. I'll go in through the emergency airlock.
Without your space helmet, Dave, we're going to find that rather difficult.
Hal, I won't argue with you anymore. Open the doors.
Dave, this conversation can serve no purpose anymore.
Anyway, this is the problem with goal-directed computers. So in this case, HAL had an objective to achieve a successful mission, worked out that Dave was going to prevent that objective, and therefore worked a plan of action out to stop Dave from unplugging it. So we did the same thing with our computer and it did the same thing that Hal did. Except we didn't run it on the shuttle. Okay, let me just finish with a couple of things. I want to show you one more small video and then I'll make a general comment. Once we had designed the machines to, in their own ways, be rational, our next step was, okay, what happens if we have societies of agents? How do they work together? And so one of the very first things that we try to do was, well, if you're going to work together in a society of agents, you're going to be able to need to recognise the mental state of another agent. That is, if you can somehow work out what some other agent's goals and objectives are by their actions or what their beliefs are, then you're going to have a better way of interacting, particularly with sort of competitive forces in a world in which you're trying to survive. So the trick then was, how could we twist this technology around so that we can somehow recognise the objectives of other people and then either help them or, in the example I'm going to show you, work against those objectives. So this particular example is, we did a lot of work for the Australian Defence Department, which when it's purchasing aircraft and whatever, does a very detailed simulations of war games to make sure that the radars and everything work or the aircraft work, so that they can, and therefore they purchase this thing or that. So they're very sophisticated simulations. So this simulation, and I never remember which aircraft are which, but it's basically, you've got some asset being attacked by two enemy aircraft and you've got it being defended by two defensive aircraft. The defensive aircraft are using our BDI agents to try and recognise the intentions of these other agents, because you need to be able to recognise what their objectives and goals are so that you can go out and attack them or defend in the right way. So, for example, the enemy aircraft may be doing a split movement, so you need to go out to meet them that way, or they may be coming in this way and you have to go out this way. So if you don't get their intentions right, then you're not, you're going to send your aircraft off this way and the enemy comes in some other direction. So it's very important to recognise their intentions. So I'll just, so this is doing two things. One, it's using VDI agents to do all the minute controlling of the individual aircraft, but it's also using them to try and recognise the intentions of others. So those things that you're seeing are the radars. So actually at this particular point, those things aren't seeing one another. So the yellow and green and the red and purple aircraft can't see each other, but eventually they intersect, so they do see each other. There's no sound. So, right, as far as I remember, the red and the purple are the defending aircraft and the green and the yellow are the attacking ones. But as it's flying, I mean, nothing much is happening now, but you'll see once they start to move, everything about these aircraft in this simulated world, including turning on radars, turning off radars, minute controls of the turns and whatever, are all controlled by these goal-directed agents. So this is the view from the, I guess, the enemy aircraft or the attacking aircraft. So all of this is controlled by these goal-directed agents. And the red aircraft, I hope I've got it right, is the defensive one, and it's now using its BDI agents and has picked up what the intentions are of the enemy aircraft, and I think it determines that it's going to do some sort of split movement, makes appropriate moves and fires this missile at the enemy aircraft, because it has done a split, one's gone that way and the other's gone that way. And so it's responded appropriately, whereas when we turned off that recognition capability, half the time it got it right and the other half the time it got it wrong. So it's an example of how complex a domain that you can apply these technologies to. Okay, I'll finish it there just because of the time, but let me just say a couple of things. what we're now doing is work I'm now doing is in management of chronic disease, and that is cost to the Australian economy, the health system, $60 billion per annum, workforce productivity, $8 billion per annum. Massive cost. It requires collaborative care if you're actually going to do a collaborative care between a whole care team and the patient. And key to it is managing chronic disease like diabetes is having that team collaborate and intervene in ways that are effective. And to do that, very important part of that is not only being able to respond to a variety of different circumstances, but being able to recognise the mental state of the patient. You know, are they not doing this because they believe their beliefs are wrong? Are they not doing this because they've got a desire to go to the footy rather than do something else? Are they missing a plan of action? So a lot of the work we've done in the BDI agents in defence and in robots, etc., all come into being when you come to try and do some complex collaborative action like chronic disease management. So that's where our current work is, and as I said, it's around, in that case, collaborative behaviour, trying to produce better outcomes for patients. But all those same elements of the BDI model come in. Two things to say. Clearly, from an evolutionary point of view, emotions play a very crucial role in the way humans interact. You know, what's their fun? You know, should our BDI agents have emotions? Why should we give them guilt? Why should we give them guilt? Should they have fear? Should they have, you know? They must have some functional role, one thinks. And so part of our work is investigating those elements of those attributes that we need to put in the agents. To tie it all up, and I guess to put it back to the notion of the singularity, one of the things that's very clear with the BDI agents is they themselves all become highly competitive amongst themselves for achieving their objectives. Even as we sort of even if these machines become, if you like, more capable of us in terms of their rational decision making, you are going to end up with a situation in which they're still competitive with one another. And whether you actually get to a world where you get a positive feedback that goes on an improvement curve, rather than you get just another level of intelligence and another level of competition which prevents any sort of positive feedback loop occurring, is, I think, a very real question. And I think that this notion that you're always going to be constrained by multiple competing forces, just as you were in evolution, will continue on even as you go through what you might have think of as a singularity. So the idea of getting nice positive feedback that shifts you up into a better world is, I think, unlikely to be realised.
Okay, we've got time for 3 concise questions. If anybody does have any, here's the mic, I think it works. Can you hear that? No? Okay. No, it doesn't work. Try this one. 1, 2. No, neither of them work. You can always do that. Okay, questions? Any hands? No questions? Ben?
The thing I've always had with computers and BDI, it still requires a lot of work on the programmer's part to gain relevance and context and that sort of thing. That's still one of the problems, challenges in applying the system.
Sure, I think compared to where you need to get to have these machines much more realistic and able to be anything like us, is a long way off. I mean, it does require a lot of work to give them, I mean, the rules of rationality, I think we understand those quite well, minus emotions, but actually giving them the information and knowledge they need is difficult. And that's the same in all AI.
I read
Sure, and so, I mean, I was going to say, this notion of honesty and things that came up in Rob's talk. It's, yeah, I mean, that the robots, the BDI agents will deceive if they see it's to their advantage, and they have some plans of action that say, I'll better achieve my objective by doing this deceit than they'll act deceitfully. So it depends entirely what their objectives are. Do I think it's dangerous? Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very complex question. I mean, it's that whole question of honesty and whether honesty is always the best policy. Yeah, well, I mean, for example, if you were trying to defend the assets of some country and you were the guy, the nation trying to do it, you may want to deceive your enemies about what you're doing. So I don't know whether that's a good idea or not, but it's, yeah. I mean, if they're going to be goal-directed and they're going to put that together themselves anyway. They're going to know that, because they're going to explore various possibilities, they're going to know that they're going to work out that's a way of achieving their objective, and they'll do it. Hard to prevent. Yes?
You've obviously been working in this field for quite a while. I was just wondering, given the previous speaker made a comment that no one really has a theory of mind, but what's your view of what are the real bottlenecks again for sort of human intelligence?
Yeah, I think there's a big difference between a theory of mind and building a machine that acts like it's rational, and in a sense acts like it has a mind. But if you ask what the huge bottlenecks are, I think the biggest bottlenecks really are the knowledge issue. I mean, it's very hard to give computers the sort of knowledge that we have and be able to pull together the right bits at the right moments in time. So plans and beliefs and give some structure to that and enable us to do it, but it's still extremely hard to represent that in a very flexible way. So that's the major bottleneck. Last one.
Okay. To probably put this down to the lack of knowledge of exact fundamentals of the BDI agents, but from the way that you were describing it, it sounds like they're more or less on a level playing field with one another, that they're interacting and their basic awareness of one another and their intentions are more or less on the same relative playing field. I would argue that on a fundamental level for these BDI agents to sort of progress to the next level, that it would be necessary for some of them to not know what is going on around them, to just focus on what they're doing and actually be instructed by other BDI agents in a sort of like a hierarchical level. Is that sort of research progressing forward, or is that?
Sure, and that's what, I mean, it's what happens when you have teams of agents. They all have different skills, and some throw across a problem to others, and then you've got a whole issue about learning these plans, and there's a whole literature on how you can do that as well. So most of the elements are sort of there in place, but a lot of it is still early days.
Okay, that's it for the question time. That clock is actually very slow. So look, we're coming back at 11:15 to see Lev talk. So you can go out through any door, but when you come back into the theatre, if you're going to be the slightest bit late, please come back through the door up there. Thanks.